Today we are going to talk about what is escrow, what is a preliminary title report, what is encroachment, and I have my friend Shalene from Landmark Title Assurance Agency, and we're going to start right now. So hi Shalene, I am so grateful that you are taking time to be doing this and have some questions answered that are very common, and I am not the best in the field to give them an answer.
Well, absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. Just to fill you in on a little bit about what escrow does is we're the neutral third party to the transaction that works with all parties involved, buyers, sellers, lenders, and realtors, in order to make your transactions seamless.
It is important that you as a buyer and as a seller understand what an escrow officer really do during the transactions. They are a big piece of the transaction, and very often they are not acknowledged, and people really don't understand how important the role is in a real estate transaction. And let's start with what is the preliminary title report? What are things a buyer should be looking for? And then we're gonna go on the seller side of it.
Okay. So, well, the preliminary title report for all parties is basically a reference guide as to what's going on with the title of the property and what's recorded against the property. That is not really the responsibility of the buyer or seller, because your escrow officer will make sure all of the items shown on that are cleared and you are getting clear title to the property prior to closing escrow. So the document you receive is for your reference. You can check out the CC&Rs and easements to make sure there aren't any restrictions surrounding your property that maybe would be a red flag for you, or something that you're not interested in. Let's say the HOA doesn't allow certain structures in the backyard and you need to have a boat back there, so you need to have a shed built, and that isn't allowed. If that's a deal breaker for you, that would be one thing to look out for. Other than that, really lean on your escrow officer and feel free to call them at any time, and they should be able to educate you on what's shown on your specific title report.
And now, if you're a buyer, just so you know, that is one of the contingencies you have on the purchase contract. Once you are reviewing that, you have 5 days to let your agent know if there's something you disagree. So let's say the city of Glendale is not going to allow you to do a little casita that you're planning to do in the property. That might be important for you, and this is the time when you ask those questions. And then from there, if that is something that is a material fact for you, then you can cancel the contract because of that. You just gotta make sure it's in timing and everything is in writing. It is important, if you are considering selling your home, that you run one before you even put the house on the market. There are times that you don't even know there are things that haven't finished. For example, a few years back, I had a seller. They didn't know that there was a permit that was not filed properly with the city of Phoenix. They hired a contractor and he didn't do the final paperwork with the city of Phoenix, and that was going to be a hiccup in the transaction if they wouldn't do the preliminary title report ahead of time. We just ran into one recently when there was a judgment for one of the sellers, and this was discovered during the transaction. So tell us a little bit what is important for the sellers on the seller side to be a little more proactive.
Yeah, if you feel that there's a blemish that's on title that you can be proactive about. Some other situation could be that one of the owners passed away and there's an estate, and we want to make sure that everything is in order and all the necessary documents have been filed with the court in order to sell the home. You can always provide the property address to the escrow officer, and we can just do a preliminary search on the actual property itself. The only thing with judgments is that we have to wait for us to have an open escrow, because our title department will only search people's names once we have an open transaction. Other than that, we can do a lot of preliminary stuff just to make sure that everything's in order and that there aren't any surprises.
In preliminary title report, a lot of times links are sent out to look at the maps, to look for encroachments. Is there a specific way a buyer should recognize that, or is something that it's important they ask to the escrow officer, where is the encroachment going? I know all the properties have an easement from the city of Phoenix. It just happens to be in different parts of the property.
Right, and you'll find that in the exceptions part of the title report. Typically, everything will be sent in a link, a third-party service, and you'll be able to click on that link and go through the exceptions portion. And if you have any questions on that, because it is kind of difficult to interpret and read, feel free to call your escrow officer and we can interpret anything that you're not understanding.
Is it a living will enough, one of the children of the homeowners, to receive the property, or has to be a trust? And I know there is a lot of things that has to be done in a certain way. So what's the rule on that one?
So we are a community property state. So if a husband and wife are on title and they have acceptance of right of survivorship, the other spouse would be able to automatically acquire the title to the property without having to go through probate. Same with unmarried people that are on title together with right of survivorship. That's the important part. If you have right of survivorship, you automatically acquire title to the property. As far as if a parent is on title and they pass away and then their child is left and they were not on the title of the home, that would be a situation you would have to go through probate. So ways to get around that are to make sure that the property's in a trust and there's successor trustees. You can do an LLC and have multiple members of the LLC. Those are things that we suggest as well.
So a living will is not enough?
A living will is not enough as far as title purposes in order to transfer title.
One question that happens very often and most buyers don't understand is when they are buying the property, they are asked how they want to have title, and we have different types of title. And I know you cannot advise them either, that is more of a legal question. So let's just start, what is the most common that people take, or what, will protect like their spouse, or if they're buying a property together, to just make sure they would not have to go to probate or into any legal issues down the road.
So the most common form for a husband and wife would be accepting the community property with right of survivorship. And the most common way for multiple parties taking title together that are not married is joint tenancy with right of survivorship.
Is there something in a specific that you have seen a contract falling apart, that it's becoming very common?
Yeah, appraisals, appraisal issues, and that's very common now. And that could happen up all the way until the week before closing, a couple days before closing, because the closing dates are getting closer and closer. We used to have 30 to 45 day closings. Now we're looking at 20 to 25 day, because people are trying to make their offers very competitive. So the appraisal ends up happening right at the end, and then that needs to be addressed.
So it's important that if you are waiving an appraisal during a contract, you do understand that the seller doesn't have to come down in price, and the seller will be forfeiting your earnest money. And we see right now that buyers put a significantly amount of money into escrow, and it's important that you are putting that, you are willingly saying, I will lose this money if the appraisal doesn't come, because you're doing that contingency. And the same applies when you are not doing a home inspection and saying you're buying the house as is. So that is very, very important. How title decides, I know you are overviewing the transaction and making sure everything goes according to the contract. You are neutral, just like you have said before. and how the decision come to where the earnest money is going to be dispersed?
So the parties themselves would need to submit their request in writing to the escrow officer. That could be an email. Once we receive that person's request, the file is packaged up and it goes off to admin for review. They review the contract, they review all of the opinions of the parties, and then it's determined where the earnest is released.
If you have a dispute between the buyer and the seller where they both feel entitled about it, what is the next step to do?
Same process. So the file is packaged up and taken to admin. Admin will thoroughly review absolutely everything in that file, and then they'll come up with their conclusion and email out all parties to let them know what's been determined.
So Shalene, tell us about HOA. Sometimes we have fines, sometimes there are things that are not disclosed, and then one of them happens very often after a buyer bought a property. He gets a letter from the HOA that the house needs to be painted. How can a buyer protect themselves from happening something like that? Should they be asking these questions before, besides reading the HOA disclosure?
So if there are fines that are violations or fines that are present at the time of closing, the HOA, they should be presenting that to the parties in the demand that goes out to the agents and buyer and seller and title and escrow. Escrow will then also let you know that there's a violation or fine. That needs to be cleared prior to closing escrow. The only other option besides having the seller clear those violations is to have the buyer take the property subject to those violations, in which case the buyer would need to sign an addendum to that effect. The lender needs to approve that, and then we can proceed with closing. But yes, it is very important once you receive those HOA disclosures and demands to give it a good, thorough read through and make sure that there's no existing things like a house painting that need to be taken care of.
Thank you. Well, I hope this was valuable information to you. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Shalene. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
If you are considering to buy a house, you can call me, and you make sure you use Shalene from Landmark Title Insurance, and you will be in great hands. God bless you, and I will see you the next time.